I'm Adrienne Jeanette, Associate Curator at the University Museums, and I'm here today speaking with Jen McClung, who wrote a beautiful interpretation for Preston Singletary's Oil on Feather, the object that you'll see in 1 minute. And Jen's going to answer some questions for me and talk a little bit about what she feels when she studied this work of art and what she does every day in her work here on campus. So first question, how did you come to study and teach American Indian Studies?
My path into teaching American Indian Studies was really unconventional. It's not something I studied. I kind of accidentally ended up just teaching Native American Studies when there was a staff shortage, and they just needed someone to teach the intro classes. So I volunteered and was really mentored into this discipline by my colleagues and the directors of the program that we've had over the years, and they've been so gracious with sharing information with me and encouraging me to learn and to experience things not from like an academic perspective, but from a really in-person perspective. Like I've learned so much of what I've learned has been from Indigenous people directly, rather than reading about them. And that's a very different kind of education, very different path to this discipline than I think most people take. But I think it's almost in its own way a very Indigenous way of learning is through experience rather than a top-down sort of hierarchical structure. So that was my journey into Native American Studies, and it's been 11 years now.
How do you use both historical and contemporary American Indian art in your classes?
I bring in contemporary Native artists day one of any class that I teach, actually. On my intro slide, I usually use an image from Stephen Paul Judd, who's a Kiowa Choctaw artist. He's a pop artist, and so he does this great work with archival photographs where he juxtaposes the archival photograph, whatever it is, like let's say it's a string of teepees being photographed, and then he'll Photoshop like Star Wars things into it or other pop culture references that are not native, so to speak. And so I begin my semester with that, and I draw my students' attention to that right away. Like, here's what we're looking at. Here's what we're doing. Native people are still here. They're not stuck in the past. They're doing funny, innovative, really funny, really great work that challenges our understanding and stereotypes of Native people. So I start from the ground up in using art, and I use it actually all throughout the semester. In anything I'm teaching, I usually incorporate some kind of artist, some kind of visual artist or music or performance artist who's Native into whatever topic I'm doing. So I use it all the time.
Why is it important that we include the art and voices of American Indians, Native Americans, Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the work that we do as a higher education institution?
That's such a good question. It's really important that we include their voices and their presence because they are American. They are our neighbors. They are us. We are them, they are us. Not to diminish distinctions between my experience and their experience. Like I'm not a person of color, so I don't move through the world as a person of color. But understanding that although there are differences in how you experience life, ultimately they're my neighbor and I'm their neighbor, and there's a mutually beneficial relationship that can be had when we understand each other. It goes both ways. Like we all benefit if that understanding is nourished and nurtured. So including them in our curriculum, I think on one level exposes our students, and here honestly mostly white students, to these other groups of people that many of them haven't ever experienced or heard even anything about beyond Hollywood, like in the case of Native Americans. Most of our students' experiences here with Native people come from Hollywood, come from Pocahontas or Dances with Wolves. And so including Native people, contemporary Native people, and historic Native people in our curriculum helps to open their eyes to seeing Native people as they are today. Because often one of the questions that I hear so frequently asked of my Native students is, or commented to my Native students, people tell them, "You don't look Native," right? Well, what does that mean exactly? What does it mean to look Native, right? That's the expectation that we have. That's what Hollywood has told us. Native people should look like this. They should have feathers. They should have, dark skin. They should be wearing leather, and etc. And so when a Native person does not match that idea, there's a dismissal of that person as Native. And so if we can educate, in my case, if I can educate my students about who Native people are today and the variety of cultures that exist and the variety of careers that they have and things that they do, they begin to see and understand that Native people are still here. And again, coming back to what I said at the beginning, they are our neighbors, right? They're not over there. They're very much here with us.
What does Preston Singletary's oil on feather sculpture represent to you?
To me, his sculpture represents continuance and continuity, and exploration too. Like, I love that he has taken some really traditional Tlingit elements and has brought them to a very untraditional element or medium of glass. That's not something that Tlingit people have typically worked in. Most Native people, I would say, typically don't work in glass. It's kind of I don't know how to put it, but it's an expensive medium to work in. So you'd be very privileged to have access.
And it's greatly lacking in diversity even to this day.
Right. So to me, there's a great deal of fun. I know that might sound like awkward or weird, but there's a playfulness to his work in the text, the way he combines tradition and brings it into new mediums that aren't traditionally used. And his subject matter, though, in this particular one is very serious. And I don't know what it represents to other people, but for me it invoked immediately memories of the Exxon Valdez oil spill back in the 80s. And I don't know if that's what he intended with this particular piece, but that's what it evokes for me. And the oil drop coming off of the feather, for me, symbolizes resistance and resilience. Eventually that oil is going to slip off that feather, because interestingly enough, the feathers have their own oils that resist anything that would weigh the feathers down and clog them up. So if I could think of maybe the feather itself as a representation of the Tlingit people in being resistant and resilient, and not being clogged up or bogged down by the oil, which perhaps in this case could represent colonization or government or things like that. But there's a beauty to just that drop of oil about to slide off, and to me it says the feather is about to be done with it. It's letting it go.
how can we all better engage with Native voices in the arts and for museums when using our historical collections?
I think for me, the challenge is presenting those historical collections without reinforcing the idea that Native people are people of the past, right? A lot of people expect to see baskets and pottery, and those are sort of frozen in time artifacts in a way. So I think I'm in favor and a fan of juxtaposing collections, like having the contemporary with the historical and having those pieces be in conversation with each other and allowing people to make their own connections. But always, I think, having a reminder that here's the historical piece and here's the significance of it. Here's some contemporary Native artists who are doing really cool work today, so that presence is really reinforced in students' minds, to have both the historic and the contemporary in the same space, to have the past and the present